The call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and I knew, before I even answered, that everything was about to change. My ex-wife Sarah's voice was different, not the usual controlled hostility I'd grown accustomed to over the past 2 years since our divorce, but something shakier, more vulnerable. "Mike, I need to tell you something about Emma," she said, and my stomach dropped. Our 16-year-old daughter had been acting strange lately during our weekend visits, but I'd chalked it up to typical teenage drama. "What's wrong? Is she hurt?" She's been arrested, Mike. Last night. Drug possession. They found pills in her backpack at school." I sat up in bed, my mind racing. What kind of pills? Adderall. A lot of it. They think she was selling them. The room felt like it was spinning. My daughter, honor student, soccer player, the kid who used to cry when she accidentally stepped on ants, was facing drug charges. And worse, Sarah's tone suggested there was more to the story. "There's something else," Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "The police want to talk to both of us, today. They think this might be connected to something bigger." I was already reaching for my clothes. Connected to what, Sarah? The silence stretched too long. When she finally spoke, her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "They think Brad might be involved." Brad? My replacement? The guy Sarah had been dating for the past year and a half, who'd moved into what used to be my house, who Emma called Uncle Brad with an enthusiasm that made my chest tight every time I heard it. The successful pharmaceutical sales rep who drove a BMW and took my family, my former family, on vacations I couldn't afford. Involved how? "I can't talk about this over the phone. Can you meet me at the police station? They want to see us at 9. After she hung up, I sat in the silence of my one-bedroom apartment, surrounded by the mismatched furniture that had been deemed not worth fighting over during the divorce proceedings. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sarah had kept the house, the good furniture, most of our savings, and primary custody of Emma. I'd walked away with my truck, my tools, and weekend visits with my daughter. Now, somehow, I was the one getting called in to help clean up a mess that had happened on her watch. The Crenshaw Police Department looked exactly like every other municipal building I'd ever been in. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, and that particular smell of industrial cleaning products mixed with coffee and resignation. Sarah was already there when I arrived, sitting in the lobby with her lawyer. Of course she'd brought her lawyer. She looked older than when I'd seen her last month. The stress lines around her eyes were more pronounced, and her usually perfect blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. For a brief moment, I remembered the woman I'd fallen in love with 20 years ago, before mortgages and career pressures and Brad had gotten in the way. "Mike," she said, standing up. Her lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in her 50s named Patricia Holbrook, extended her hand. "Mr. Brennan, thank you for coming." Detective Rodriguez was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of serious expression that suggested he'd seen enough to know when a case was about to get complicated. He led us into a small conference room where another detective, an older white guy named Harrison, was already waiting with a stack of files. "Let me get straight to the point," Rodriguez said after we'd settled around the table. "Your daughter Emma is facing some serious charges. Possession with intent to distribute. But what we're more interested in is where she got the drugs." He slid a clear evidence bag across the table. Inside were maybe 30 small blue pills. These are pharmaceutical-grade Adderall, not street drugs. They came from somewhere legitimate, which means someone with access to prescription medications is supplying them. Sarah's face went pale. I could see where this was heading. "We've been investigating a ring of pharmaceutical sales reps who've been diverting medications," Detective Harrison added. "Pills that are supposed to go to pharmacies and hospitals are ending up on the street instead. Emma might be a small fish, but she could help us catch some bigger ones." "What exactly are you saying?" Patricia asked. We're saying that Brad Mitchell, who lives in your home and has access to your daughter, is currently under investigation for drug diversion, has been for the past 6 months. The room went dead silent. Sarah made a small noise, like she'd been punched in the stomach. I felt a mixture of vindication and horror. Vindication because I'd never trusted Brad, horror because my daughter was caught in the middle of whatever this was. "That's impossible," Sarah finally managed. "Brad would never. He's successful. He has a good job. He makes a lot of money selling drugs," Harrison interrupted. "Just not the way you thought." Rodriguez opened one of the files. "Mr. Brennan, we know you work construction. You've been divorced from Mrs. Mitchell for 2 years. How would you describe your relationship with your daughter?" The question caught me off guard. "She's my daughter. I love her. I see her every other weekend and Wednesday nights when I can manage it around work." "Has she ever mentioned Brad giving her anything? Pills, money, anything unusual?" I thought back to our recent visits. Emma had been distant, distracted. I'd assumed it was normal teenage stuff, maybe resentment about the divorce. But now I remembered her having more cash than usual, new clothes that Sarah claimed were gifts from Brad. "She's had more spending money lately," I admitted. "But Sarah said Brad was just being generous." Sarah shot me a look. "He is generous. He cares about Emma." "Generous enough to turn her into a drug dealer?" I snapped. "That's enough," Patricia intervened. "Detectives, what exactly are you asking my clients to do?" Rodriguez leaned forward. "We want Emma to cooperate. Help us build a case against the people who got her into this mess. In exchange, we can work with the DA's office on the charges she's facing." "You want her to wear a wire," I said. It wasn't a question. "We want her to help us understand the distribution network, how the drugs move from the pharmaceutical companies to the street, who's involved, how it works." "Absolutely not," Sarah said immediately. "I won't put my daughter in danger." "Your daughter is already in danger," Harrison said bluntly. "She's facing felony charges, and if Brad Mitchell is using your home as a base of operations, she's been in danger for months." I looked at Sarah, really looked at her for the first time in years. Beneath the anger and defensiveness, I could see fear, real, bone-deep terror about what was happening to our daughter. "Where is Emma now?" I asked. "She's at home with my mother," Sarah said quietly. "Suspended from school, facing criminal charges, and living with the man who might have gotten her into this mess in the first place?" I said. "That sound like a good plan to you?" "Don't you dare," Sarah hissed. "Don't you dare try to make this about custody." "This isn't about us, Mike. This is about Emma." She was right, and that fact hit me harder than any of her accusations during the divorce. This wasn't about vindication or proving I'd been right about Brad. This was about my 16-year-old daughter, who somewhere along the way had gotten pulled into something that could destroy her life. "What kind of cooperation are we talking about?" I asked the detectives. Patricia put a hand on my arm. "Mike, I'd strongly advise against." "I'm not asking you," I said, not taking my eyes off Rodriguez. "I'm asking them. What does Emma need to do?" "Mostly we need information. Who approached her about selling pills? How the money worked? Was Brad directly involved, or was she recruited by someone else? We think there's a network of kids in several high schools, all being supplied by adults with access to pharmaceuticals. And if she cooperates, the DA would be willing to consider reducing the charges to simple possession, maybe even diversion programs instead of jail time." Sarah was shaking her head. "I can't ask her to do this. What if these people find out? What if they come after her? What if they don't need to come after her because she's already going to prison?" I asked. "Sarah, she's 16. A felony conviction destroys everything. College, career, everything we want for her." "We want to meet with Emma," Rodriguez said. "Explain the situation. Let her decide for herself. She's old enough to understand what she's facing. No, Sarah said firmly. I won't allow it. I felt the familiar frustration that had characterized the last years of our marriage. Sarah's need to control everything, to protect Emma from any discomfort or difficulty, even when that protection made things worse. You might not have a choice, I said quietly. The courts can order her to cooperate. Then let them, but I'm not volunteering my daughter to be an informant. The meeting ended with everyone agreeing to reconvene in 2 days, after Patricia had time to research Emma's options. As we walked out of the police station, Sarah and I found ourselves alone for the first time in months. "This is a nightmare," she said, stopping next to her car. "How did everything get so fucked up?" The profanity surprised me. Sarah rarely swore, even during our worst fights. It was a small sign of how shattered she was by everything that had happened. "How long have you known?" I asked. "Known what?" "About Brad, about whatever he's been doing." "I didn't know anything," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I mean, he makes good money, he's successful, Sarah." She looked at me, and for a moment, the walls came down. There were things, small things, phone calls at weird hours. Sometimes he'd disappear for a few hours, say he had work emergencies. And the money. He always had cash, way more than made sense for his salary. "But I didn't want to ask questions," she admitted. "After the divorce, after everything we went through, I just wanted things to be easy. Brad made things easy. He paid for vacations, bought Emma things, never complained about money. I thought I deserved that after all the years of struggling." The financial struggles had been one of the biggest sources of tension in our marriage. My construction business had its ups and downs, and Sarah had always worried about money, even when we were doing okay. Brad's apparent financial stability had been attractive to her in a way I could never be. Did Emma know about whatever Brad was doing? I don't think so, but she's smart, Mike, smarter than either of us gives her credit for. If there was something to notice, she probably noticed. We stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Then Sarah asked the question I'd been dreading. "Do you think she knew what she was doing? Selling the pills, I mean?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "I think she knew exactly what she was doing." Sarah's face crumpled. How did I miss this? How did I not know my own daughter was dealing drugs? Because you were working 60 hours a week trying to maintain the lifestyle you thought you deserved, and you trusted your boyfriend to handle the parts of parenting you didn't have time for, I said, then immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry, that was unfair." "No, it wasn't," she said, wiping her eyes. "It was honest. Maybe too honest, but not unfair." I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it wasn't her fault, but the truth was more complicated than that. We'd both made choices that had led to this moment. My own guilt was eating at me. How many signs had I missed during our weekend visits? How many opportunities to really connect with Emma had I missed because I was too focused on my own anger and resentment? "I need to see her," I said, "tonight, before we decide anything." "Mike, I don't think. She's my daughter too, Sarah, and right now she needs both of us to put our bullshit aside and figure out how to help her." Sarah nodded slowly. "Okay, but not at the house. Brad's there, and I can't deal with that right now." We agreed to meet at the coffee shop near Emma's school, a place where she'd sometimes meet friends after soccer practice. The irony wasn't lost on me that we were going to discuss our daughter's drug dealing charges at a place where she used to go for hot chocolate and homework help. Emma looked smaller than I remembered when she walked into the coffee shop that evening. She'd always been tall for her age, athletic from years of soccer, but sitting across from Sarah and me in the corner booth, she seemed fragile in a way that made my chest tight. "Are you guys getting back together?" she asked after we'd all ordered. "Because if this is some kind of intervention thing, I can handle my own problems." "This isn't about us," I said. This is about you facing serious criminal charges." "I know what I'm facing," she said, and there was an edge to her voice I'd never heard before. "The question is whether you guys are finally going to start treating me like I have a brain." Sarah reached across the table. "Emma, sweetheart, we just want to understand what happened, how you got involved in all this." Emma pulled her hand away. "What happened is that I'm 16 and I needed money and someone offered me a way to make some. It's not complicated." "But why did you need money?" I asked. "Your mom and Brad take care of everything." "Do they?" Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Mom works all the time, and Brad takes care of things all right, just not the way you think." Sarah and I exchanged glances. "What does that mean?" Sarah asked. Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. When she looked up, her eyes were older than they should have been. "Brad's been giving me pills since Christmas, said they were samples from work, that they'd help me focus on school. Adderall, mostly. Sometimes other stuff." "He was giving you drugs?" Sarah's voice was barely audible. "At first, yeah, just giving them to me. Said all the successful kids at school were using study drugs, that it was no big deal. And it helped, you know. My grades got better, I could concentrate longer." I felt sick. But then what happened? "Then he said I could help other kids who needed them, make some money doing it. He said it was practically a public service, helping kids succeed in school." "And you believed that?" Emma's eyes flashed. "I'm 16, Dad, not stupid. I knew exactly what I was doing. But Brad made it seem normal, like everyone was doing it. And the money was good, really good." "How much money?" Sarah asked. "About $300 a week, sometimes more if there was high demand, like during finals." I did the math quickly. Emma had been at this for months, which meant thousands of dollars. "Where's the money now?" "Gone. I spent it." "On what?" "Stuff. Clothes, makeup, concerts. I paid for my own gas, bought Mom flowers for Mother's Day, got you that expensive socket set for your birthday. Remember how surprised you were that I could afford it? The socket set was sitting in my truck right now. $150 worth of professional-grade tools that I'd assumed Sarah had helped pay for. The fact that my daughter had bought it with drug money made me feel complicit in something I'd had no knowledge of." "Emma," Sarah said carefully, "did Brad ever ask you to do anything else? Anything that made you uncomfortable?" "You mean, did he touch me inappropriately?" "No, Mom. This was business. Brad's very professional about his business." The casual way she said it made my skin crawl. Our daughter had been turned into a drug dealer by her mother's boyfriend, and she talked about it like it was a part-time job at McDonald's. "The police want you to cooperate," I said. "I know. They already talked to me." "When?" Sarah asked. "This morning, before you got there. They came to Grandma's house." Sarah looked furious. "They questioned you without me there, without a lawyer?" "I'm not 5, Mom. And yeah, I talked to them. You know what I found out?" We waited. "Brad's not some small-time dealer giving pills to high school kids. He's part of something big, like really big. The detective said they think his network moves hundreds of thousands of pills every month." "Jesus," I breathed. "And the kids selling at school were the smallest part of it. Most of the pills go to college campuses and professionals, people who need to work longer hours, study harder, stay competitive." She was describing a drug operation with the detached professionalism of someone giving a business presentation. I realized that my daughter hadn't just been selling drugs. She'd been educated about the business by someone who understood it intimately. "So what did you tell the police?" Sarah asked. "I told them I'd think about it." "What's to think about?" I asked. "You cooperate, help them stop the people who got you into this mess, and maybe you don't go to prison." "It's not that simple, Dad." "Why not?" Emma looked around the coffee shop, making sure no one was listening. "Because Brad's not the only one involved. And if I start talking, a lot of people are going to be very unhappy with me." "What people?" "Other kids at school, their parents, people with a lot more to lose than I do." Are you saying you're afraid? I'm saying I'm not stupid. You think Brad operates alone? You think he's the only pharmaceutical sales rep in this area who figured out that selling pills directly is more profitable than going through pharmacies? The scope of what she was describing was starting to sink in. This wasn't just about my daughter making bad choices or her mother's boyfriend being a criminal. This was about a network of professionals, possibly parents of kids we knew, people in our community who had decided that drug dealing was an acceptable side business. Emma, Sarah said quietly, how many other kids from your school are involved? A lot, maybe 20 or 30, and not just from Crenshaw High. Brad has connections at 4 different schools. My God. The thing is, Emma continued, most of the parents have no idea, but some do, and some of them are involved themselves. I thought about the parents I knew from Emma's soccer team, from school events, from the community where I'd lived for 15 years before the divorce. How many of them were part of this? How many of the successful, well-dressed families at high school football games were funding their lifestyle with drug money? So what do you want to do? I asked. I want to cooperate, Emma said firmly, but not the way the police want me to. What does that mean? It means I don't just want to give them Brad. I want to give them everybody, the whole network, all of it. Sarah looked terrified. Emma, that's incredibly dangerous. Maybe, but it's the only way this ends. If I just give them Brad, someone else takes his place and keeps using kids to sell drugs. If I help them understand how the whole thing works, maybe they can actually shut it down. I stared at my daughter, trying to reconcile the 16-year-old across from me with the child I thought I knew. When had she become this person? When had she developed the kind of moral clarity and courage that I wasn't sure I possessed myself? The other thing, Emma said, is that I'm not doing this to save myself. I'm probably going to face consequences no matter what. But maybe I can keep other kids from getting pulled into what I got pulled into. What do you mean? Dad, Brad didn't start with me. He's been doing this for years. There were kids before me, and there will be kids after me unless someone stops him. I have a chance to stop him. The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too public for the conversation we were having. I looked at Sarah and saw my own thoughts reflected in her expression. Our daughter had grown up in ways we hadn't noticed, and the person sitting across from us was both more mature and more damaged than either of us had realized. If you do this, I said carefully, there's no going back. These people will know you cooperated. That could follow you for years. If I don't do this, I'm a convicted drug dealer for the rest of my life. That'll follow me for years too. She was right, and her logic was unassailable. But the protective instincts that had been dormant during her childhood were now screaming at me to find some way to shield her from the consequences of choices that had been made by adults who should have protected her instead of exploiting her. I need to know something, I said, and I need you to be completely honest. Emma nodded. Did we fail you? Your mother and I? Did our divorce, the way we handled everything, did that push you toward this? Emma was quiet for a long time. I think you guys were so focused on being angry with each other that you stopped paying attention to what was actually happening with me. But that doesn't mean this is your fault. I made choices, bad choices. But you were a kid making choices because the adults in your life weren't giving you what you needed. Maybe, but I'm not a kid anymore, and I need to fix what I broke. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years and met Sarah and Patricia at the police station. Emma had spent the night at my apartment, the first time she'd stayed over since the divorce, and I watched her sleep on my couch, trying to remember when she'd stopped looking like a child. Detective Rodriguez had brought in federal agents, DEA and FBI, which confirmed that Emma had been right about the scope of the operation. Agent Martinez, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, explained that they'd been tracking pharmaceutical diversions across 3 states and that Emma's information could be the key to unraveling the entire network. Your daughter understands the retail level of the operation better than anyone we've talked to, Martinez said, but she's also been exposed to the distribution and supply sides in ways that most street-level dealers never are. Because Brad trusted her, I said. Because Brad was grooming her to take on a bigger role, Martinez corrected. The conversations she's described, the level of detail he shared with her about the business, that's not how you treat a disposable asset. That's how you treat someone you're planning to promote. The thought made me nauseous. Brad hadn't just been using Emma to sell drugs. He'd been preparing to make her a permanent part of his operation. So what's the plan? Sarah asked. Agent Martinez opened a file. Emma continues to live at home and act normal. We equip her with recording devices and have her document her interactions with Brad and any other distributors she's been in contact with. For how long? As long as it takes. Could be weeks, could be months. Absolutely not, Sarah said immediately. I'm not having my daughter live with a drug dealer while she's wearing a wire for the FBI. Mrs. Mitchell, your daughter has been living with a drug dealer for over a year. At least now we'll be watching. The harshness of the truth hung in the air. Sarah's face went white, and I saw her finally fully grasping what Emma's cooperation would mean, admitting that she'd brought a criminal into their home and exposed their daughter to dangers she'd been too distracted or willfully blind to notice. There's another option, I said. Emma moves in with me. Everyone looked at me. Mike, Sarah said, you can't. Your apartment is tiny. You work long hours? I'll make it work. Emma can transfer to the high school in my district, get a fresh start somewhere Brad and his network don't have connections. That won't work for the investigation, Rodriguez said. We need Emma to maintain her normal patterns, her normal relationships. Then we need to get Brad out of the house, I said. On what grounds? Patricia asked. He hasn't been formally charged with anything. Then charge him. Agent Martinez shook her head. If we arrest Brad now, the entire network disappears. We need to map the full scope of the operation before we start making arrests. So you want my daughter to continue living with a drug dealer and gather evidence that could get her killed? I said. Does that about sum it up? We want your daughter to help us save other kids from going through what she's gone through. Emma, who had been quiet throughout the meeting, finally spoke up. I'll do it. Emma, Sarah started. I'll do it, she repeated. But I have conditions. Agent Martinez raised an eyebrow. Conditions? First, my dad moves back into the house. What? Sarah and I said simultaneously. If I'm going to be recording conversations and gathering evidence, I want someone there who I trust completely. Dad moves into the guest room, tells everyone he's there to help me with college applications or something. Emma, that's not, Sarah began. Second, if anything goes wrong, if I feel unsafe at any point, we pull the plug immediately, no matter what it does to your investigation. That's reasonable, Martinez said. Third, when this is over, I want to talk to other kids who might be facing the same kind of recruitment. I want to help educate people about how this works. I looked at my daughter with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. She was taking responsibility not just for her own choices, but for protecting other kids from making the same mistakes. And fourth, Emma said, looking directly at Sarah, no more lies. About anything, between any of us. If we're going to do this as a family, we do it honestly. The word family hit me like a physical blow. For the first time in 2 years, Emma was talking about the three of us as a unit, even if it was a broken one. Sarah was crying. Emma, I don't know if I can handle you being in danger. I'm already in danger, Mom. I have been for months. The only question is whether I'm in danger alone or whether we face it together. Agent Martinez looked around the table. So, we're all in agreement? Emma cooperates, Mr. Brennan moves back into the family home temporarily, and we proceed with the investigation. I looked at Sarah. Living in the same house with her again, even temporarily, even under these circumstances, was going to be complicated in ways I couldn't fully anticipate. But Emma was right. She needed both of us, and she needed us to function as a team. "Yeah," I said, "we're in agreement." "There's one more thing," Emma said. "I want to see Brad's face when he realizes what's happening. When this is all over, when you arrest him, I want to be there." "Emma, that's not—" "He turned me into a criminal," she said quietly. "He used me, manipulated me, put me in danger, and did it all while pretending to care about my future. I want him to know that I figured it out. I want him to stop him." Agent Martinez nodded. "That can be arranged." That evening, I packed a suitcase for the first time since the divorce and drove to the house I'd once shared with Sarah. Emma met me at the door, and for a moment, it felt almost normal, a father coming home from work to his family. But normal was an illusion. Brad was in the kitchen making dinner, completely unaware that his girlfriend's ex-husband was about to move into his house as part of an FBI investigation. The conversation that followed was one of the most surreal of my life. "Mike," Brad said, extending his hand with the confident smile that had always made me want to punch him. "Good to see you." "Brad." I shook his hand, knowing that Emma was somewhere in the house with recording equipment, documenting every interaction. "Sarah tells me you're going to help Emma with college applications," he continued. "That's great. She's got a real shot at some good schools." "Yeah, she's a smart kid. Smart and motivated. I've been trying to teach her about success, about what it takes to get ahead in this world." The casual way he said it, knowing what I now knew about his lessons, made my skin crawl, but I managed to keep my expression neutral. "She's definitely learned a lot this year," I said. Sarah appeared in the doorway, looking nervous. "Mike, let me show you to the guest room." The guest room had been my home office during our marriage, and walking into it felt like stepping into a museum of my former life. Sarah had kept some of my books on the shelves, and there was still a dent in the wall from where I'd thrown a hammer during a particularly frustrating home repair project. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked, quietly after she'd closed the door. "No," I admitted, "but Emma's sure, and right now, that's what matters." "Mike, I'm scared." "Good. You should be scared. Our daughter's about to help the FBI take down a drug network, and she's going to do it while living with the person who got her into this in the first place." Sarah sat down on the bed. "Do you think we can do this? Work together, I mean? After everything that happened between us?" "I think we don't have a choice. Emma needs us to be adults." "I know I hurt you," she said quietly. "The way I handled the divorce, the things I said about your business, about money." "Sarah, we don't have to do this now." "Yes, we do. If we're going to live in the same house, even temporarily, we need to clear the air." I sat down in the chair by the window, the same chair where I used to read Emma bedtime stories when she was little. "Okay, let's clear the air." I was angry about the business struggles, about feeling like I couldn't count on you financially, about having to work so much to make up for the unpredictability of your income. I know, but I was also scared. And instead of talking to you about it, I let the resentment build until I couldn't see anything good about our marriage anymore. And Brad was stable. Brad seemed stable. Brad seemed successful. I thought I was choosing security for me and Emma. Instead, you chose a drug dealer? Sarah winced. Instead, I chose someone who turned out to be a drug dealer. Someone who used my daughter to expand his business. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, I could hear Emma and Brad talking in the kitchen, their voices muffled but audible. Somewhere in the house, recording equipment was capturing every word Brad said, every casual comment about his business, every piece of evidence that would eventually put him in prison. "Do you think Emma's strong enough for this?" Sarah asked. "I think Emma's stronger than both of us, but I also think she shouldn't have to be." "What do you mean?" "I mean, she's 16, and she's already seen more of the world's ugliness than most adults. She's been forced to make adult decisions because the adults in her life failed her. Including you? Especially me. I was so angry about the divorce, so focused on my own hurt feelings, that I didn't notice my daughter was being groomed by a criminal. The next few weeks developed a routine that was both familiar and completely alien. I got up early, had coffee with Sarah while Emma got ready for school, and tried to pretend that it was normal for us to be sharing the same space again. Brad came and went on his sales calls, occasionally bringing Emma small gifts, jewelry, clothes, things that I now knew were probably paid for with drug money. Emma wore the wire almost every day, and each evening she would meet with Agent Martinez to download the recordings and discuss what she'd learned. I watched my daughter transform into someone I barely recognized. Still Emma, but Emma playing a role. Emma pretending to be the same naive kid who had trusted Brad's explanations about helping other students succeed. The hardest part was watching Sarah struggle with the cognitive dissonance of still caring about Brad while knowing what he was. She'd built a life with him, imagined a future with him, and now she had to pretend everything was normal while helping to gather evidence for his prosecution. "He asked me to marry him," she told me one evening after Emma had gone to bed and Brad was out of town on business. "When?" "Last month, before any of this happened." "What did you say?" "I said I needed time to think about it. I thought I was being careful, making sure it was the right decision for Emma." The irony was devastating. Sarah had been trying to protect Emma's future by considering marriage to the man who was destroying it. "Do you love him?" I asked. "I thought I did. But how can you love someone when you don't really know who they are?" It was a question that applied to more than just Brad. Sarah and I had been married for 15 years, but in the end, we'd both felt like we were living with strangers. Emma came into the kitchen, supposedly to get a glass of water, but really to escape from whatever conversation Brad was having on the phone in the living room. "Everything okay?" I asked. "He's talking to someone about a big shipment coming in next week. Sounds like it's going to be the biggest one yet." Sarah and I exchanged glances. Emma's casual tone when discussing drug deals still shocked me, but I was starting to understand that it was her way of maintaining psychological distance from what she was being asked to do. "Did you get it on recording?" "Yeah, Agent Martinez is going to love this one." Emma sat down at the kitchen table with us, and for a moment it felt like the family dinners we used to have before everything went wrong. But instead of talking about homework and soccer practice, we were discussing drug busts and federal investigations. "I've been thinking," Emma said, "about what happens after." "After what?" "After Brad gets arrested, after the trial, after everything. What about it?" "I want to change schools anyway. I want to start over somewhere where nobody knows about any of this." "That might be difficult," Sarah said. "Your name might end up in the news." "Maybe, but I still want to try. I want to go somewhere where I can just be a normal kid again." "You can be a normal kid here," I said. Emma shook her head. "No, I can't. Everyone at school is going to know I was a narc. Everyone's going to know I helped put their friends' parents in prison." She was probably right. Even though she was doing the right thing, teenage social dynamics didn't reward moral courage the way adult society claimed to. "Where would you want to go?" Sarah asked. "Maybe live with Dad full-time. Transfer to the high school in his district." Sarah's face tightened. "Emma, your father's apartment isn't really set up for—" "I'll get a bigger place," I said quickly. 2 bedrooms, whatever she needs." "You can't afford a bigger place, Mike. Your business is barely breaking even." "My business is fine," I said, though we all knew it wasn't entirely true. Construction work was feast or famine, and I'd been going through a leaner period lately. "I have money saved," Emma said quietly. We both looked at her. From selling drugs. I know it's dirty money, but it's still money. I could help with rent, utilities, whatever." "Absolutely not," Sarah and I said simultaneously. "Why not? It's my mess. I should help clean it up." "Because you're 16, I said, "and because no parent should take money from their child to pay for housing." "Even drug money?" "Especially drug money." Emma was quiet for a moment. "What if I testified at trial? Would that help with sentencing?" "Probably," Sarah said, "but testifying means facing cross-examination from defense attorneys who will try to make you look like a liar or a criminal." "I am a criminal." "You're a kid who made mistakes because adults manipulated you." "That's not how a jury will see it. They'll see a drug dealer trying to save herself by blaming someone else." I realized that Emma had thought through the legal implications of her cooperation more thoroughly than Sarah or I had. She understood that helping the FBI didn't automatically make her a victim in the eyes of the law. "Are you having second thoughts about cooperating?" I asked. "No, but I'm not stupid about what it means." Brad came into the kitchen then, ending our conversation. "What are you guys talking about?" "College plans," Emma said smoothly. "Dad thinks I should apply to schools with good business programs." "Smart thinking," Brad said, ruffling Emma's hair in a gesture that now made my skin crawl. "Business is where the real opportunities are, especially if you're willing to think outside the box." "What do you mean?" Emma asked, and I could see her mentally hitting the recording button. "I mean, success comes to people who see opportunities that others miss. People who aren't afraid to take risks." "What kind of risks?" Brad glanced at Sarah and me, then back at Emma. "Well, we'll talk about it later, when you're ready to understand more advanced concepts." After he left the room, Emma looked at us with disgust. "He still thinks he's mentoring me, like he's doing me some kind of favor." "What did Agent Martinez say about the recordings from this week?" Sarah asked. "She said they have enough to arrest Brad tomorrow if they wanted to, but they're waiting for the big shipment he was talking about. They want to catch him in the act of distribution, not just possession." "How much longer?" "Maybe a week, maybe 2. The waiting was the hardest part. Every day that Emma continued to live in the same house as Brad, every conversation she recorded, every piece of evidence she gathered, felt like we were walking a tightrope over an abyss. Brad was smart, and eventually he was going to notice that something was wrong. The break came on a Thursday evening. Emma burst into the kitchen where Sarah and I were having dinner, her face pale with excitement and fear. "It's happening," she said. "Tomorrow night. Brad just got off the phone with someone. They're moving a huge shipment through town tomorrow, and he wants me to coordinate distribution to 3 different schools." "How huge?" I asked. "Thousands of pills. He said it's enough to supply the network for 2 months." Sarah stood up. "We need to call Agent Martinez." "Already did. She's on her way over." "What about Brad?" "He's out getting supplies. Said he'd be back in a couple hours." Agent Martinez arrived 20 minutes later with Detective Rodriguez and a van full of surveillance equipment. They set up in our garage, turning our home into the command center for what they described as the largest pharmaceutical diversion bust in the state's history. "Tomorrow night, we take down the entire network," Martinez explained. "Emma's information has helped us identify suppliers in 4 states and distributors at 12 schools. We're coordinating with local and federal agencies for simultaneous arrests." "What do you need Emma to do?" I asked. "Exactly what Brad asks her to do. Show up at the designated location, act normal, and let us handle the rest." "Where's the location?" "The parking lot behind the old Sears at Millfield Shopping Center. Brad's using it as a distribution hub." I knew the location. It was isolated, poorly lit, and had minimal security cameras. Perfect for a drug deal, terrible for keeping my daughter safe. "How many agents will be watching?" Sarah asked. "Enough. Emma will never be in real danger." "You can't guarantee that." "No," Martinez admitted. "We can't, but we can minimize the risk." Emma had been quiet during the briefing. Now she spoke up. "I want to know the arrest signal." "What do you mean?" "I want to know exactly when you're going to move in, so I can get clear." Martinez nodded. When you hear 3 short sirens blasts, get down and stay down. We'll handle everything else." That night, none of us slept well. Brad came home late, excited about the next day's business, but unaware that every word he said was being recorded by devices hidden throughout the house. He talked about the operation like a legitimate business expansion, discussing profit margins and growth potential with the enthusiasm of a startup entrepreneur. "This could set us up for years," he told Emma, as they sat in the living room going over distribution lists. "If everything goes smoothly tomorrow, we'll have enough capital to expand into 3 new markets." "What happens to the kids who've been selling?" Emma asked. "Do they get a cut of the profits?" "They get paid for their work, just like always. But the real money is in the supply chain, not retail." I listened from the kitchen, marveling at how Brad had convinced himself that he was running a legitimate business rather than a criminal enterprise that exploited children. The next evening, Emma got dressed like she was going to a normal high school party. Jeans, sneakers, a hoodie, clothes that wouldn't attract attention but would allow her to move quickly if necessary. The wire she wore was smaller than a button, virtually undetectable even if someone was looking for it. "You sure about this?" I asked as she prepared to leave. "I'm sure. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, you get out. Don't worry about the investigation. Don't worry about gathering evidence. You just get out." "I will." Sarah hugged her tightly. "I love you. No matter what happens, no matter what choices you've made, I love you." "I love you too, Mom." Emma left at 7 p.m., driving her car to the shopping center where Brad was waiting with enough illegal drugs to supply half the high schools in the county. Sarah and I followed in my truck, parking at a gas station across the street where we could see the Sears parking lot, but hopefully remain unnoticed. Agent Martinez's voice crackled through the radio they'd given us. "All units in position. Target 1 has arrived at the location." Through binoculars, I could see Brad's BMW in the far corner of the parking lot. A few minutes later, Emma's Honda pulled up next to it. "Target 2 has made contact with Target 1, Martinez reported. For 30 minutes, we watched our daughter participate in what looked like a normal conversation with her mother's boyfriend. Other cars came and went. People we now knew were distributors from other schools. Adults who looked like soccer parents and PTA members, all there to collect their share of pills to sell to children. "Jesus," Sarah whispered, "how many people are involved in this?" I counted at least 15 cars that had come and gone during the 30-minute window. Each one represented someone who had decided that selling drugs to kids was an acceptable way to make money. "Target 2 is receiving packages from multiple distributors," Martinez reported. "We're documenting all transactions." Emma moved from car to car with practiced efficiency, collecting packages and handing out what looked like cash or payment instructions. From a distance, she looked like any other teenager hanging out in a parking lot. Only Sarah and I knew that she was gathering evidence that would destroy the lives of everyone present. Then something went wrong. "We have a problem," Martinez's voice was sharp with concern. "Unknown vehicle approaching from the east, not one of ours." A black SUV with tinted windows was driving slowly through the parking lot, circling the area where Brad and Emma were conducting business. Could be security, could be competitors, could be law enforcement from another jurisdiction, Martinez continued. "All units stay in position until we know what we're dealing with." The SUV stopped about 50 yards from Brad's car. 2 men got out, both large and intimidating in a way that had nothing to do with law enforcement. "That's not police," Sarah said. Through the binoculars, I watched Emma notice the men approaching. Even from a distance, I could see her body language change from casual to alert. She said something to Brad, who looked toward the SUV and immediately started moving toward his car. "Target 1 is attempting to leave the location," Martinez reported. "All units prepare to move." But before anyone could react, one of the men from the SUV called out something that made Brad stop walking. Emma was now standing between Brad and the 2 strangers. and I realized with horror that my daughter was about to be caught in the middle of whatever confrontation was about to happen. "Move in now," I said into the radio. "Not yet. We need to see what develops. My daughter is standing between drug dealers and people who might be armed. Move in now. We have protocol to follow, Mr. Brennan." I handed the radio to Sarah and got out of the truck. "Mike, what are you doing?" What I should have done 2 years ago. Protecting my daughter. I started walking across the street toward the parking lot, knowing that I was probably about to destroy a federal investigation, but not caring about anything except getting Emma away from whatever was happening. Through my peripheral vision, I could see unmarked vehicles moving into position around the parking lot, but they were still holding back, still waiting for some signal or development that might never come. As I got closer, I could hear voices. Brad was arguing with the two men, something about territory and agreements and unauthorized expansion. The words drug and dealing weren't being used, but the context was unmistakable. Emma saw me approaching and shook her head slightly, trying to signal me to stay back. But I kept walking until I was close enough to hear the conversation clearly. "You were told to keep your operations small," one of the men was saying. "High school kids, local distribution only. This looks like you're trying to build an empire." "I'm just meeting demand," Brad replied. "These kids want product. I provide product. What's the problem?" "The problem is that you're attracting attention. The problem is that federal agents have been asking questions about pharmaceutical diversions. The problem is that you're going to bring down heat on everyone." I felt my blood turn cold. These men knew about the federal investigation, which meant they might know about Emma's cooperation. That's when I heard the sirens. 3 short blasts, just like Agent Martinez had promised, the arrest signal. Emma immediately dropped to the ground, just as she'd been instructed. But Brad and the 2 men from the SUV didn't know what the signal meant, and they started looking around wildly for the source of the sound. Marked and unmarked police cars converged on the parking lot from every direction, sirens wailing and lights flashing. Over a loudspeaker, someone was shouting instructions to get down and keep hands visible. I ran toward Emma, no longer caring about staying hidden or following protocol. She was on the ground next to Brad's car, covering her head with her hands as armed agents moved in from multiple directions. "Federal agents, nobody move!" But one of the men from the SUV was already moving, reaching inside his jacket for what looked like a weapon. An agent shouted a warning, then fired a single shot that dropped the man to the pavement. The second man raised his hands immediately, but Brad made the mistake of trying to run. He made it about 10 steps before 3 agents tackled him to the ground, sending packages of pills scattering across the asphalt. I reached Emma just as Agent Martinez got to her. "You okay?" I asked. "I'm okay." She was breathing hard but seemed uninjured. "You did great," Martinez said. "Everything went exactly according to plan." "Except for the part where someone got shot," Emma pointed out. "That wasn't part of the plan, but it wasn't unexpected either. These operations sometimes involve people who don't want to be arrested peacefully." Around us, the parking lot was chaos. Agents were arresting everyone who had been present for the drug deal, loading them into vehicles and collecting evidence from dozens of cars. The scope of the operation was even larger than I'd realized. There were enough people being arrested to fill a small courthouse. "Is it over?" Emma asked. "This part is over," Martinez said. "But you'll need to testify when the cases go to trial." "How many cases?" "Brad alone is looking at federal drug trafficking charges, conspiracy, distribution to minors, and about 15 other felonies. But he's not the biggest fish we caught tonight." "Who is?" Martinez pointed toward a woman in handcuffs being loaded into a federal vehicle. "Dr. Patricia Knowles. She's a licensed physician who's been writing fake prescriptions for 3 years. She supplied about 60% of the pills that went through Brad's network." I recognized the name. Dr. Knowles had been Emma's pediatrician until she was 12. A doctor. Doctors, pharmaceutical sales reps, pharmacists, even some hospital administrators. This network involved people at every level of the legitimate medical system. The drive home was silent. Emma sat in the back seat of my truck, still wearing the wire that had helped bring down one of the largest drug networks in the state's history. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the suburban neighborhoods where we'd raised our daughter, probably wondering how many other families were dealing with secrets they couldn't imagine. "I'm proud of you," I finally said as we pulled into our driveway. "Why?" "Because you did the right thing, even when it was dangerous and scary." "I did the right thing to fix the wrong thing I did in the first place." "That's what adults do, Emma. They take responsibility for their mistakes and try to fix them." Brad's BMW wasn't in the driveway, and it never would be again. He was in federal custody, facing charges that would likely put him in prison for the next 15 years. The man Sarah had planned to marry, the man who had shared our dinner table and taken family vacations with my daughter, was a drug dealer who had turned children into criminals as part of his business model. "What happens now?" Sarah asked as we sat in the kitchen. "Now we try to be a family again," I said. "A different kind of family than we were before, but still a family." "Can we do that, after everything that's happened?" I looked around the kitchen where we'd had so many conversations over the years, about money, about work, about Emma's future, about our marriage. All of those problems seemed small compared to what we'd just been through. "I think we have to try," I said. Emma came into the kitchen then, having changed out of her wire and into pajamas. She looked younger than she had in months, more like the 16-year-old she actually was, and less like the criminal informant she'd been forced to become. "I've been thinking about what I want to do next year," she said. "College?" Sarah asked. "Maybe, but first I want to spend some time talking to other kids about what happened to me. Help them understand how easy it is to get pulled into something like this." "That's a good idea," I said. "And I want us to go to family therapy, all three of us." Sarah and I exchanged glances. "Why?" "Because we're all pretty fucked up, and we need help figuring out how to be a family without lying to each other or keeping secrets." She was right. The past 2 years had damaged all of us in different ways, and Emma's involvement with Brad's drug network was just the most visible symptom of problems that went much deeper. "Okay," Sarah said. "We'll find someone good." "And Dad moves back in. Not back in, but stays in the guest room until we figure out what kind of family we're going to be." "Emma, that's complicated," Sarah started. "Everything's complicated," Emma interrupted. "But I need both of you here while I deal with the trials and the testimony and whatever happens next." The trials started 6 months later. Emma testified against Brad, Dr. Knowles, and 12 other defendants, spending 2 weeks on witness stands explaining how pharmaceutical drugs moved from legitimate suppliers to high school students. Her testimony was devastating, detailed, and delivered with a poise that impressed prosecutors and horrified defense attorneys. Brad's lawyer tried to paint Emma as a willing participant who was now trying to shift blame to avoid responsibility for her own choices. But Agent Martinez's recordings made it clear that Emma had been systematically manipulated by adults who understood exactly what they were doing. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before convicting Brad on all counts. He was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Dr. Knowles received 22 years. In total, the investigation Emma had made possible resulted in the conviction of 43 adults and the seizure of over $2 million in cash and assets. Emma's own charges were reduced to community service and probation, with the understanding that her cooperation had been essential to dismantling a network that had been exploiting children for years. The day after Brad's sentencing, Emma, Sarah, and I sat in the same coffee shop where we'd first discussed her cooperation with the FBI. "Any regrets?" I asked. "About cooperating? No. About getting involved in the first place? every day. What would you tell other kids who might be facing the same choice you faced? I'd tell them that there's no such thing as easy money. And I'd tell them that adults who offer you money for doing things your parents wouldn't approve of are not trying to help you succeed. They're trying to use you. Sarah reached across the table and took Emma's hand. I'm sorry I didn't protect you from Brad. You thought you were protecting me by giving me a stable home and a father figure. I was protecting myself. I wanted financial security and someone who would make my life easier. That's honest. Therapy has made me more honest. The family therapy Emma had insisted on had been difficult but necessary. We'd spent months learning how to communicate without the layers of resentment and defensiveness that had built up over years of marriage and 2 years of divorce. We were still figuring out what our family looked like, but at least we were figuring it out together. So, what's next? I asked. College applications, Emma said. I want to study criminal justice, maybe become a prosecutor. That's a good fit. And I want to keep speaking to kids about drug prevention. Agent Martinez said there are programs that would let me share my story. What about you guys? Emma asked. What's next for you? Sarah and I looked at each other. After 18 months of living in the same house while attending family therapy, we'd reached some conclusions about our relationship that neither of us had expected. We're going to try dating, Sarah said. Emma's eyebrows shot up. Dating each other? I confirmed. Not moving back in together, not remarrying, just seeing if we can build something new based on who we are now instead of who we were 10 years ago. That's weird but cool, Emma said. Everything about our family is weird but cool, Sarah pointed out. She was right. We were a divorced couple living in the same house, raising a daughter who had helped the FBI take down a drug network, attending family therapy together, and trying to figure out if we could fall in love with each other again. But it was working. Slowly, imperfectly, with lots of setbacks and complications, but it was working. Emma graduated from high school with honors and a scholarship to the State University's Criminal Justice Program. At her graduation party, Agent Martinez gave a speech about courage and responsibility that made everyone cry, including Emma. I want to say something to all the parents here, Martinez said. What Emma did required incredible bravery, but it shouldn't have been necessary. She was able to help us because the adults in her life had failed to protect her from other adults who wanted to exploit her. Every kid deserves parents who pay attention, who ask hard questions, and who put their children's safety ahead of their own comfort. It was a gentle but unmistakable criticism of Sarah's relationship with Brad and of my absence during the period when Emma was being recruited into drug dealing. But it was also a recognition that we'd learned from our mistakes and become the parents Emma deserved. After the graduation party, the three of us sat on the back deck of the house Sarah and I had bought together 22 years earlier. Emma was 18 now, an adult by legal standards, but still our daughter in every way that mattered. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't figured out what Brad was doing? Emma asked. Every day, Sarah said. I think about that too. I think about how close I came to becoming someone I wouldn't recognize. But you didn't, I said. You made the hardest choice possible, and you made it for the right reasons. We all made hard choices, Emma said. Mom had to admit she'd been wrong about Brad. Dad had to move back into a house where he wasn't welcome. And we all had to learn how to be honest with each other. Are you glad we did? Emma looked at both of us, then at the house where she'd grown up, where she'd made terrible mistakes, where she'd found the courage to fix them. Yeah, she said, I'm glad we did. 2 years later, Emma called me from college with news that Brad had been stabbed in federal prison and was in critical condition. He survived, but the incident reminded all of us that the consequences of the choices made during that terrible year were still playing out in ways we couldn't control or predict. Do you feel bad for him? Emma asked. No, I said honestly. I feel bad that it came to this, but I don't feel bad for him. Good, because I don't either." Emma's voice was different now, more confident, more sure of herself. College had been good for her, giving her distance from the events that had shaped her teenage years and perspective on how those events had changed her. "How are things with you and Mom?" "Good, really good, actually." Sarah and I had been officially back together for 6 months, though we were taking things slowly. We'd learned too much about the dangers of assuming we knew each other to rush into anything permanent. "Think you'll get married again?" "Maybe. We're focused on getting it right this time instead of getting it done quickly. That's probably smart." After I hung up, I thought about the question Emma had asked about feeling bad for Brad. The truth was more complicated than my simple answer. I didn't feel bad for Brad facing the consequences of his choices, but I did feel something like pity for the man who had convinced himself that selling drugs to children was a legitimate business opportunity. Brad had destroyed his own life as thoroughly as he'd tried to destroy Emma's. The difference was that Emma had found the courage to change course, while Brad had continued to believe that his success justified his methods right up until the moment he was sentenced to federal prison. Sarah came home from work to find me sitting on the back deck, thinking about choices and consequences and the strange paths that families take toward healing. "Everything okay?" she asked, settling into the chair next to mine. "Emma called. Brad was attacked in prison. Is he okay?" "Hell, Lev. Do you think Emma's okay hearing about it?" "I think Emma's stronger than either of us gives her credit for. She always has been." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset over the neighborhood where we'd raised our daughter, where we'd made mistakes that had nearly destroyed our family, where we'd learned to forgive each other and ourselves. "Mike? Yeah? Do you think we would have found our way back to each other if none of this had happened?" I considered the question seriously. No, I think we were too angry, too hurt, too convinced that the other person was the problem. "So you think Emma's involvement with Brad was what saved our family?" "I think Emma's courage saved our family. The involvement with Brad just gave her the opportunity to show us who she really was." Sarah reached over and took my hand. "I love you. I know I didn't always show it, and I know I hurt you badly, but I love you. I love you too. Even after everything? Especially after everything." The house behind us held 24 years of shared history: marriage, parenthood, divorce, crisis, and reconciliation. In the morning, Emma would call with updates from college, and would continue the ongoing process of figuring out how to be a family that had been broken and rebuilt in a stronger form. But tonight, Sarah and I sat on the deck of our shared home, holding hands and watching the sunset on the most difficult and transformative period of our lives, grateful for second chances and for a daughter who had taught us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to do what's right even when you're terrified. The story of our family wasn't over. Emma still had college to finish, career choices to make, and her own relationships to navigate. Sarah and I still had the complicated work of rebuilding a marriage that had been destroyed and reconstructed from entirely new materials. But for the first time in years, we were facing the future together, as a family that had learned the hardest way possible that love alone isn't enough, that real families are built on honesty, courage, and the willingness to sacrifice for each other when the stakes are highest. Emma had shown us the way. Now it was up to us to follow her example and become the parents she deserved and the couple we'd once hoped to be.